What is Black history? Black history is simply the part of American history that looks at stories of African Americans in the United States with special emphasis on slavery and the struggles for civil rights of that particular community. A struggle that started in 1619, had its shining moments in 1865 and 1965 respectively, and continues to this day. My name is Jenner Elias, and this is Historicity, a channel in which we keep a record of the constant called time, the good and the bad, with hopes of learning not to repeat the mistakes of the past. Now, this is not going to be an in-depth study and understanding of African American history, but an introductory look at what should be a deeper and more nuanced conversation. A starting point, if you will. With that said, the first thing we must do when trying to understand Black history is place it in its proper chronological context. So let's construct a quick timeline. First, the pyramids were built around the year 2589 BCE and 2504 BCE, so more or less for the purpose of our timeline, right here. Jesus walked the earth around the year 2 BCE and died around the year 31 AD when he was crucified, which would be right here. Slaves started being brought over by the Spaniards in 1501 in the island that came to be called La Hispaniola, or the Spanish one, which is Dominican Republic and Haiti today, so right here. And the British started bringing slaves to North America in 1619, which is right here. And the United States was founded in 1776 by the American Revolution, which would be right here. Now, the end of the desk right here is us, the year of our Lord 2020. You see, this right here is ancient history, but this right here is not so ancient. Let me present you another point, and this is all before we start the actual conversation so that we can all properly place things in context. Anderson Cooper, the news anchor for CNN, just had a baby. He named him Wyatt Morgan Cooper. And although we don't know him, besides just that, there are several things we can already assume about Wyatt. One, he's going to grow quite possibly in a very loving home. Two, as time goes on and he grows up, there are not going to be many things he's going to lack. He's going to have food, he's going to have the best education, he's going to have the best contacts in life. He's going to rub shoulders with the Ikilon at CNN and the news networks of the world. He's going to make friends with some of the leading individuals around the world, making news and headlines today because, well, they run the world and make news daily. They are the leaders of our society, otherwise they wouldn't be on the news. Number three, after Anderson Cooper passes away, and hopefully he'll live a long and joyful life, Wyatt is quite possibly going to be rich, as he's going to inherit his father's fortune, which has been tied to the Vanderbilt fortune, which was worth $200 million in the 1800s alone. I'm sorry, Anderson, this information is online and we all know that you didn't inherit $200 million, but I'm just trying to make a point. And if you don't know anything about Anderson Cooper, right now you're probably asking yourself, how did Anderson Cooper get so lucky just being a news anchor and just being on TV? Well, the answer is quite simple. Although Anderson Cooper is incredibly wealthy in his own right, you have to recognize that he is one of the hardest working men on television, someone who forged his own path by throwing himself into war zones as a 20-something-year-old reporter in order for him to get noticed and be given a shot at making a living doing what he loves the most, which is the news. He also inherited money from his mother, who in turn inherited a cool $2.5 million trust fund in 1924, which in today's money would be around $35 million. She didn't have to do anything for that money. She was a baby. She didn't do anything but be born in the right family and inherited what is equivalent to $35 million. An incredible cushion that possibly eliminated some of the wrinkles of regular life. I'm not saying his and her life haven't had their own wrinkles. I'm just saying that some of those issues that we usually deal with because of lack of wealth and connectivity with the higher echelons of our society, well, he and her quite possibly didn't have to deal with those issues, for he was born a Vanderbilt and now Wyatt. If you ever visited Nashville, Tennessee, his family name is literally plastered all over, thanks to the university, which was founded by his family's cool $1 million donation in the 1800s. Now, and here's the twist. All that awesome safety has come as a result of being a Vanderbilt, of the Vanderbilt name he received by being the third great-grandson of Cornelius Vanderbilt, the family's patriarch. In other words, his grandfather, Reginald Claypool Vanderbilt, was the son of his great-grandfather, Cornelius Vanderbilt II, who was the son of his second great-grandfather, William Henry Vanderbilt, who was the son of his third great-grandfather, Cornelius Vanderbilt, aka the Commodore, the founder of the Vanderbilt fortune. Cornelius the Commodore was born in 1794. So basically, that entire family right there spans the entirety of the American history. But it seems like a long time ago, right? We are talking about a third great-grandson. Yet the wealth and the benefits and safeties that usually come with it are still being passed down from generation to generation. Again, I would like to reiterate. I use Anderson Cooper as an example because although he inherited a couple of pennies, he is still one of the hardest working men on television. But based on that point, you can probably already guess where I'm going with this. Either way, humor me a bit farther. Let me introduce you to a different family, the Tyler family, and a different individual. As a matter of fact, this individual was President of the United States. His name was John Tyler. Now, Tyler died in 1862. He was America's 10th president and presided over the nation from 1841 to 1845. That's before the Civil War, during times of slavery. He was a slave owner and definitely profited from slaves, as he was a proponent of slavery's expansion. This was the time period in which Texas was becoming part of the Union, and if Texas loved one thing other than great barbecue and shooting guns, it was slavery. What if I told you that this man, who was born in 1790, who lived during the times of slavery before the Civil War, has at this very moment 2 living grandsons today?
Now some fun facts about John Tyler. He was the latter half of a famous campaign slogan. The first vice president elevated to the presidency on the death of the chief executive. The first president to marry in the White House in 1844. And 174 years later, 2 of his grandchildren are still around. Chip Reed met one of them.
Hi, Mr. Tyler. Chip Reed.
89-year-old Harrison Ruffin Tyler is the grandson of U.S. President John Tyler, who was born in 1790. Yes, you heard that right. Just 3 generations. President Tyler, his son Lyon Tyler, and grandson Harrison span almost the entire history of the United States.
But I'm still here.
We met Harrison and his son William at President Tyler's Virginia estate.
When you tell people that you are the great-grandson and your father is the grandson of the 10th president of the United States, do they find it hard to believe?
I find it hard to believe.
Think of your grandfather. Do you remember touching his hands? Do you remember sharing stories by the campfire? Or maybe your family was not the touching hands, sitting by the campfire type of family. But again, think of your grandfather. The connection, the relation. It's not that far. That's 3 individuals whose life spanned the entirety of the American experiment. As a matter of fact, the US government started operating under its new constitution in 1789. Their grandfather was probably already in his mother's womb when that happened. Again, that's 3 individuals, them, their father, and their grandfather, John Tyler. What I want you to recognize through that is that slavery, for some people, was not that long ago. The wounds are still very fresh. And as you're going to see once we start putting things in historical and chronological context, there are people and institutions who have and are still actively profiting from slavery and or the effects of slavery. I'm personally thinking of all the opportunities I myself have gotten in life because of the choices my grandfathers made. And trust me, there are many. Now that hopefully you can see that all this that we're going to talk about did not take place that long ago, that possibly your grandparents, and if not your grandparents, your great-grandparents took part in it and or profited from it or fought against it. One of the things we cannot forget is the amount of people of all races and nationalities that opposed slavery and fought daily here in the US to end it for years. Which is one of the questions I always ask myself. Why build a monument to Robert E. Lee, who lost the Civil War, fought for slavery, and betrayed the Union, when you can have a monument of John Brown, who literally was executed for fighting for human rights and liberating people, a monument to Harriet Tubman? Either way, hopefully you can see now that this did not take place that long ago. This is history, but it is not ancient history. This is, I hit my toe on the table corner yesterday and it still hurts history, okay? Once we start to recognize that, then we can start moving towards creating a proper change so our children don't have to revisit these struggles again. I believe the Civil War was won by the North and the Union physically, but it is still being fought mentally and in the hearts of many people to this very day. People like the ones in Charlottesville. Because let's be honest, not only the people whose families used to be slaves haven't forgotten entirely about it, but also the ones whose families used to own slaves haven't still forgotten entirely about it. And again, I'm not talking about a physical war. I'm talking about the Confederate flag. I'm talking about the statues to the Confederacy. I'm talking about the symbols that represent the Confederacy still today. Symbols that should be equated to swastikas and SS bolts and the other symbols of the Nazi era. So let's get into the history part. These are the facts. The Spaniards, quote unquote, discovered the New World in 1492, one of the biggest lies in history, but either way, that's the story we're sticking to for now. We'll discuss reality when we talk about the crossing of the Bering Strait in a whole different episode. Christopher Columbus came over and established a government in the island of Hispaniola, today's Dominican Republic. That's when they established Santo Domingo. On that island, they started exploiting the natives so harshly that they killed them all. The Spaniards literally committed a genocide through various means within 50 years of arriving to the island. So they started importing natives from other islands, Cuba, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, and many others. Hispaniola was the centerpiece of what came to be Spain's sugar cane industry. Now, in 1495, Christopher Columbus loaded his ship with about 500 native Taino slaves that he took to Spain. Only 300 made it to Spain, which means that 200 people, 200 souls died in one trip. His main mission was to find gold for the king and queen of Spain, and he was falling short of that goal, so he decided to present the king and queen, Ferdinand II of Aragon, yes, Tolkien got his name from that, and Isabella I of Castile, whom, by the way, were the parents of Catherine of Aragon, the first wife of Henry VIII, and the mother of the famous Bloody Mary, or Mary I of England. The first woman to be crowned Queen of England was half Spanish and the granddaughter of Ferdinand and Isabella. That's our little connection to English history. Either way, back to the point. Columbus presented Ferdinand and Isabella with what he thought was the next best thing the land could produce for profit, slaves. I'm so not used to talking about them with Ferdinand and Isabella. Fernando, mijo, Fernando y la reina Isabella. Either way, Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, who was really the head of the partnership, by the way, were deeply Catholics. And I don't mean behind the scenes, do whatever you want Catholics. No. These were real Catholics. I mean, we are talking about the people who started the Inquisition. When I say they believed, I mean they believed. So they were not entirely happy with slavery. They wanted profits, but they were not happy with the institution itself. So a very contentious relationship started between the crown and their subjects, who were now establishing colonies in the New World, and the natives. The crown let the colonies do whatever they were doing for a while. But in 1501, the crown sent an order to Nicolas Obando, the governor of La Española, to return all confiscated, stolen items back to their Native American owners and to pay them wages for their work, in essence making them employees of the plantation owners. Then in 1512, they passed the law of the Burgos, then they passed the laws of Granada, and then they passed the laws of the Indies, which recognized natives as human beings. These were all really good things and show the dichotomous relationship the Spaniards had with slavery because of their Catholic roots. As a matter of fact, the laws of the Indies recognized natives as people, lesser people because of their lack of knowledge of God, but still people. And the man who fought ardently for those laws to be approved, Friar Bartolomé de las Casas, devoted his entire life to the fight against slavery for several reasons, one of which was a mistake he made around the year 1515. You see, in an attempt to save the Native Americans, mainly Taínos in Hispaniola, whom were being exploited, again, to the point of genocide, he was one of the first proponents to the crown to bring and replace the dying Native American population in the islands, which at the time he was already recognizing as human beings, with Africans whom he did not recognize as human beings and saw as being evil, mainly because they were mostly Muslims. And you have to remember that Spain had just finished fighting La Reconquista, the reconquest of the Iberian Peninsula off of the hands of the Moorish Muslims, the Emirate of Granada, which started with Al-Andalus, an offshoot of the Umayyad Caliphate, which was the first Islamic caliphate to rule over the Arabian Peninsula and North Africa after the 4 righteous caliphs. You see how this is all connected? Catholics versus Muslims. Catholics in their eyes are good, Muslims are bad. Catholics are European, light-skinned. Muslims are Africans, dark-skinned. Catholics are human. Muslims, according to their beliefs back then, are evil, inhumane, irredeemables in the eyes of God. So hence the perfect stock to be enslaved, to replace the natives whom the Catholics were increasingly seeing as children devoid of knowledge of God, but whom way down could reach salvation because they were foremost pure of heart. By 1550, when Bartolomé de las Casas and the crown were having the Valladolid debates about the humanity of natives, he argued for the humanity of both natives and Africans and against the institution of slavery, as he had already recognized the error of his ways, and that because of the first letter he wrote in 1515, Africans had already been sold and used for years into slavery. So while Spain is making strides, I hope also that you remember how the story ended. It did not end so well for Native Americans and Africans alike. The whole purpose of mentioning this is because in reality, they were debating whether slavery was a godly thing to do. The Spaniards were not entirely certain. But I'm also bringing it up because later this knowledge will come in handy when discussing the differences between the Latino and Criollo experience with slavery in the Americas and the African American experience with racism and slavery in America. And yeah, you heard me right, Latino. So go ahead and take it, Monique.
See, Jerry, I'm here today to speak for all people of mixed race in America. Now, as a Latino woman, I believe we deserve our own race category to forge an identity, Jerry. That's how I feel.
Did you just say Latino?
Yes, I did. I'm a Latino American.
Wow. First of all, you don't even look Latino. You look black. You're black. Second of all, I'm of mixed race, and I've struggled my whole life as to whether I'm Chinese, whether I'm black. But you know what? It doesn't matter.
What you are is Chinegro.
Chinegro.
Chinegro. There you go.
Chinegro.
You are a Chinegro.
What the fuck is Chinegro?
That's what you are. Chinegro is you.
That's
Okay, as I understand it, you brought a mixed race flow chart with you.
I did, Jerry.
Why don't we bring that out?
How you doing, Sugar? All right. I'm gonna call you later. Hello. Now, Jerry, if you take a look at this, Black Tino, Black Asian, Hispasian, okay? Now, for the Asian subcategories, I got you, sister. We have Chinese Negro, right here. That's you, Chinese Negro.
A word.
Your
That
Chinese
is not a
Negro.
word.
Yes, it is, sister. We have Korea Grow, that Negro, okay? We got your Negro. Hispanic, Korea Hispanic, and last but not least, check this out, y'all, Japanic. That's how I flow with it.
That was entertaining. I don't know whether it helped your understanding of Black history, but either way, that's one of the best scenes, in my opinion, in Monique's career. And it was given to us by the late and great filmmaker Tony Scott in his movie Domino. Either way, as I was saying, the problem with Spain and slavery at first was not the monarchy per se, but the colonists who were miles and miles away from the crown. The crown exhibited for a time a kind of struggle between appeasing the church and their beliefs or their pockets. But the colonists here, they did not care. They continued enslaving and abusing the natives until, for example, in Hispaniola, there was a complete genocide, like we said before. All natives, all Taínos were killed, which culminated in the Enriquillo Rebellion. En los años 1600. I'm kidding. It wasn't in the 1600s. It actually took place in the 1500s, which is even worse. They killed them all within 50 years. Do you get that? But there's one problem. The Spanish had already created one of the most profitable industries in the history of the world up until that point, the sugarcane industry, which is how they killed all the natives in the first place. They mostly overworked them. So learning from the Portuguese, who had already established a very successful slave trade from Africa into Europe, the Spaniards made 185 trips to Africa to enslave Africans. Additionally, in here, the colonists, with the help of the crown, created something which would be used by enslavers and racists all the way until 1965. Actually, until this very day, they created the loophole. The first loophole they created was the just war. If a native doesn't accept Christianity, then he or she is fair game, and they could enslave him or her because they are no longer souls of God. And there were many other loopholes, but again, they all ended with natives enslaved and in chains and dying by the masses. So they continued needing more people. We already mentioned that to replace native labor, they brought in Africans, my peoples. By the way, we have to end the idea that the Spaniards, the English, the Portuguese went to Africa and just kidnapped and stole people. They did, and they also didn't. They had active deals with kingdoms and empires in Africa, empires and kingdoms that were literally selling our forefathers to the Spaniards, to the English, and to the Portuguese. Kingdoms and empires that were often warring and fighting with one another. So whenever you say we are going to Ghana, the land of our ancestors, and visit our brothers and sisters from whom we were taken away, realize that those brothers and sisters quite possibly sold your forefathers and brothers into slavery. Just saying, this is history. Africa during that time period more or less had one of the richest empires in the world, the Mali Empire led by Mansa Musa. But since we look at the world from a Eurocentric point of view, that's not usually mentioned. Mansa Musa was so rich that on his Hajj to Mecca, the pilgrimage all Muslims must make, when he passed by Cairo, Egypt, he distributed so much gold to the people in the streets that the Egyptian economy collapsed and the price of gold didn't recover for 12 years in Egypt. These are the guys who are later selling our forefathers into slavery. I'm not specifically saying that Mansa Musa did it because he lived in the 1300s, 200 years before the discovery of the New World. But his descendants occupied that area and still live there. We, in our distant ignorance, harbor the idea that the Spaniards and the colonists and the English just went into the bush, smacked someone in the head with a club, and dragged them into a boat. And although I'm certain that did happen too at one point or another, it did not happen most of the time. When it comes to slavery, black slavery, African slavery, because they were not just being shipped to the Americas. Africa itself as a continent has a lot of explaining to do, mainly North and West Africa. That's why sometimes I laugh when people go like, we are going to Africa, the land of our ancestors. We were kings. No, we were not kings, and not all of us probably. We were fighting wars and lost. That's how people had become slaves for centuries since the beginning of time. And if we were kings, they probably despised us. They waited until we went to sleep, put us in a bag, and sold us into slavery. Kind of like Joseph, remember? His brothers hated his guts. This is getting too long, so I'm going to cut it right here, hoping that you come back for the second part of this conversation. Again, this is an oversimplistic take on these very complex issues, so I would love for you to leave your comments and or present additional information on these topics we might have ignored. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit the like button and click the bell so that every time there's a new video, you can be immediately informed. Also, come on, subscribe if you haven't already. I'm Generalized, and this is history.